Good evening, everyone. Hello. Can you hear me? All right, excellent. All right, so on behalf of the WNL Art Museum and the Center for International Education, welcome to tonight's event titled A Fireside Chat with former U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Zimbabwe and Peru, Brian A. Nichols. My name is Israel Bashir, and I'm the museum director, specifically Art Museum Director. Our museum theme this year of materiality and transformation has invited our community to consider how artists can alter how we see and understand the world, how art and museums can serve as transformative catalysts for change, and how human choices shape and transform our environment. Our year-long exploration of this theme informed the arc of programming, beginning with the exhibition Edward Bratinsky Taking Place, which captures the magnitude of land deeply marked and affected by human industry through large-scale photography. Taking Place is in collaboration with the Roger Mudd Center for Ethics theme of land use and environmental impact. You can view the exhibition in the Reeves Museum through April 18. Extending this exploration and perfectly complementing tonight's conversation is the exhibition Moffat Takadiwa, Recoded Memories. Moffat Takadiwa, a Zimbabwean-based artist living in Harare, gathers what the world has cast aside: bottle caps, keyboards, bits of plastic, and transforms them into vast, transforms them into vast, intricate tapestries. Through his work, discarded materials become both a record of local and global consumption and a meditation on renewal and reclamation. And you can view this exhibition through May 31st in Watson Galleries. Later this spring, Professor Sandy de la Savoy and I will lead 16 WNL students to Zimbabwe. I see some of you here. Thank you for coming. To explore the country's environmental and social landscape through the eyes of local artists. This course is a direct partnership with Moffat Takadiwa and Embade Art Space, a creative hub that Moffat founded to center artistic practice in an urban renewal landscape. I also want to take a moment to thank Jerry Cam, a trustee of Embade Art Space and a partner for our program, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Jerry. Finally, tonight's event is a unique opportunity to center our conversation on Zimbabwe, a nation that has been at the heart of our programming this year. This program was inspired by a desire to demonstrate the soft power of the arts, the idea that culture, values, and artistic expression can be used as profound tools of diplomatic influence. We will explore how art, environmentalism, and politics intersects through the lens of Ambassador Nichols' distinguished career, including his time as a U.S. ambassador to Zimbabwe. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Brian Nichols and Professor Brian Alexander. But please allow me to briefly read their bios before I pass the mic over. And just as a note, we will take questions at the end, okay? So Ambassador Brian A. Nichols brings more than 35 years of leadership in international relations, crisis management, and economic development across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. As Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, he shaped U.S. policy across the region, overseeing substantial foreign assistance and operational budgets while advancing initiatives to promote trade, sustainable development, and democratic governance. Ambassador Nichols currently serves on the board of First Quantum Minerals, a global mining company, and the Pan-American Development Foundation, an OAS-affiliated nonprofit focused on human development in Latin America and the Caribbean. He teaches at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. Previously, he served as U.S. Ambassador to Zimbabwe and Peru, as well as in multiple senior diplomatic roles in Washington and abroad. He is widely recognized for championing economic growth, forging strategic public-private partnerships, and strengthening legal and regulatory frameworks to support international investment. He holds a BA in political science from Tufts University and has received numerous honors for his distinguished service to U.S. foreign policy. Please help me in welcoming Ambassador Nichols to WNL. Our MC this evening, Professor Brian Alexander, is an associate professor of politics. Many of you here are joining us as a result to his fabulous classes, where he teaches courses in American politics and international relations, combining nearly 20 years of professional experience in government and politics with research and academic study. He He is the director of Washington Term, an experiential learning program offered in Washington, D.C. each spring term. Professor Alexander's research is focused on the U.S., Congress, and areas such as legislative norms, parliamentary procedures, and interest groups. He recently published Jefferson's Manual of Parliamentary Practice, the definitive edition of Thomas Jefferson's A Manual of Parliamentary Practice, originally published in 1801. And this was published as of November of last year, so congratulations. And serving as a basis for the rules of Congress ever since. To his teaching and research, Professor Alexander brings extensive professional experience, including work in public policy, nonprofits on issues such as nuclear non-proliferation and alternatives to force, U.S.-Cuba relation, immigration, and Latino politics, and environmental conservation. With that, the floor is yours, Professor Alexander. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I think it's the first time I've been introduced as an MC, so maybe just put that on the bio and skip the rest. Thank you to the Art Museum and Galleries at WNL, to Isra El-Bashir, Jessica Wager, and everyone. I've seen so many people playing a part in getting this started and getting us together here tonight. So thank you all. And of course, thank you, Ambassador Nichols, for joining us. We want to sort of have a conversation. We're going to talk about soft power, art, some of the crises facing the world, and then we're going to turn it over to students and our audience for Q&A, because we really want this to be a conversation, not just us two up here speaking, but to bring the audience in. But to kind of get us started, we'll talk for a little bit and then turn it over to a Q&A. But maybe, Ambassador Nichols, an easy way to start is to tell us briefly what made you pursue a career in diplomacy?
Well, it was my studies at Tufts University, and I took a course. Well, I went to Tufts thinking, I'm going to work for Goldman Sachs. I'm going to be a master of the universe. And I got there, and I was taking Introduction to Economics and Introduction to International Relations at the same time. And, you know, I liked one of them a lot more than I liked the other. The Introduction to International Relations, and my family had an international background. I was actually born in Germany. My dad was a university professor in Berlin when I was born. And putting more structure and framework on international affairs was something that was really fascinating to me. There's a great faculty there, and one of the instructors actually had been in the Foreign Service and talked about that experience. So I decided that I was going to pursue that, and I thought, well, you know, to join the Foreign Service, up until that point, I thought, well, you have to be like a count or a duke or something like that. I didn't know how you did it, you know, learning that there was a test that you could take to join the Foreign Service. It was a competitive process, and I was studying the things that you needed to know to prosper in that process. So I decided to take the Foreign Service exam my junior year in college, and so I took the written exam, and I passed that. And I took the oral exam, and I failed that. So sad. I wonder what happened to me. But I was only a junior, so I took my senior year, and I passed everything. I kind of knew what I had done wrong in the orals. And I joined the Foreign Service after going through the security background check, the medical check, being on the registry to get in. You know, at the time that I was in college, there were a lot of issues going on, intermediate nuclear missiles in Europe, conflict with the Soviet Union. That was a country that existed before, but it doesn't exist anymore. The fight against apartheid in South Africa. So there's a lot of stuff that galvanized our campus in international affairs, which is also something that motivated me to do that. So I entered the Foreign Service, went into training in February of 1989, and in October of 1989, went off to my first post in Lima, Peru.
Terrific. Well, we're living in such a fraught moment, one of conflict and war and uncertainty, and given the breadth of your experience, there's a part of me that just wants to say, tell us what on earth is going on and when will it stop? But we're probably better off having a more structured conversation. And so we're actually brought here tonight by the W&L Museums. It's not the Department of Politics, it's not the folks who are working most in global affairs. And as a liberal arts institution, I'm always encouraging our students to take all of these wonderful classes and to go down the colonnade and study art history, study classics, study philosophy, do all the other things besides politics. Yet we see that the arts and that culture plays such a role in politics. Let's talk about what I think in diplomacy we call soft power. And recently I was sharing an experience I had with my students. It was in the early 90s, and the Berlin Wall had recently fallen, and I was in Prague in the Czech Republic, and the US Embassy was showing the movie Grease with Olivia Newton-John, and most of you should know that, I hope. I won't sing. But, and I thought to me, I'm new to the world and new to traveling, and I thought, what a strange thing that the American Embassy is showing this movie Grease to a room full, room packed full of Czechs. Later, I realized that this is what we might call cultural diplomacy, or what political scientists call soft power. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the role of cultural diplomacy and soft power in the world and in U.S. foreign policy and in diplomacy, and kind of where you've seen it and how you've seen it evolve over the years.
Sure. I mean, that is a really powerful tool, and one that I really hope that the United States will continue to emphasize going forward. But the variety of tools that we have in exposing people to the richness of American culture, to the depth and thoughtfulness of the American education system, to American values of democracy, respect for the rule of law, human rights, inclusion of everyone. Those are all things that we can support with our cultural engagement. And some of the tools that we have, being in Peru, my first assignment, and then I went back there 25 years later as ambassador. And Peru is a very culturally rich country. It was one of the two viceroyalty capitals of the Spanish in the Americas, the other being Mexico City. And the colonial history of Peru was something that in our embassy we worked to preserve and highlight the specific art that came from that era, the churches that were built during that era. And Peru had gone through a lot of challenges, so a lot of those things were in great disrepair or at great risk. So we funded, through the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation, restoration of churches and art. Peru also noted for Machu Picchu, the great Incan ruin that was restored, is now one of the great wonders of the world, a World Monuments Site. There's a long historical link between the United States and Machu Picchu. Hiram Bingham from Yale University was the one to discover Peru. I mean, the people who lived discover Machu Picchu in Peru. Obviously, the indigenous communities that lived around it knew that there was something there, but it was overgrown and not something exploited. So the return of some artifacts that were in the United States to Peru was another way that we showed our cultural norms of valuing their possessions. The educational exchanges that we did with young people around the Americas and around Africa through the Young African Leaders Program and the Young Leaders of the Americas initiative were other ways where people could have cultural exchanges, traveling to the United States and learning more about our culture. You talked about watching Grease in Prague. When I was ambassador in Zimbabwe, we had a showing of Hamilton there. That was a great, more contemporary example of a great film. It's a film of the Broadway show, and one that really highlights the bravery of our founding fathers and particularly one of the namesakes of your university. So that was a really great experience. But we brought other cultural activities there. And while you're there, some of you hopefully will be able to go to Zimbabwe. I'm not sure if the people who are going are here tonight, but the preservation of a traditional way of painting homes from the Ndebele community in Zimbabwe is another thing that we work to preserve and highlight, as well as the Great Zimbabwe, which is the most important archaeological site in southern Africa. We work with the World Monuments Fund to preserve that. There are so many examples. I could literally fill up this entire hour just talking about this topic, and in the question and answer period we can go into this more. But why is it important? It's important because when people, through our cultural and educational exchanges, get to know America, that builds allies for us around the world. There are scores of world leaders who have been educated in the United States. The number of cabinet members who've participated in scholarship programs in the United States and exchange programs with the United States, that gives us an entree that few nations can match. And one of the goals of our strategic rival, China, right now, is to attract people to their educational system so they can build up a similar network. I can tell you that the United States is dramatically more attractive to most people, and we need to make sure that we're working to keep those doors open and preserve that attractiveness to build allies around the world who want to work with us.
Right. So you mentioned the example of Peru and the American role in to help preserve some of the global treasures in Peru. But I want to let's tie this into the terrific exhibit that's on right now of Moffat Takadiwa's work, Recoded Memories, which is down at the Reeves Museum, and I know you just looked at it. What is the role of cultural diplomacy, and how do we manage it when the relationship is, when things are a little more fraught or problematic? Because we see in Takadiwa's work, uses the waste of global industrial and consumer culture and interprets it based on the phrase I heard him use, African knowledge systems. And his work is fascinating. It's moving. It's conceptually, it's really rich and provoking. It's beautiful in kind of an ironic way because you realize this is all kind of consumer and industrial waste that he's making these sort of owning these artworks. And it points to a lot of contradictions and problems in our age. How do we sort of embrace cultural diplomacy? How do we embrace soft power? When the conditions of the people that we're engaging with or conditions in people in other countries are more difficult or challenging, and I think in some of the message in Takadiwa's work is, it's sort of fraught or it's sort of tense.
Well, one of the things first let me talk just a bit about how we met. So Moffat Takadiwa was identified by curators in the Art and Embassies program of the Department of State. We were building a new embassy in Harare, Zimbabwe, and in that embassy, we decided to display a great breadth of contemporary Zimbabwean art. And Moffat Takadiwa, Mishek Masamvu, Virginia Chihota, a number of other prominent Zimbabwean artists were highlighted in that new gorgeous embassy. And we met them when we were getting ready to inaugurate the embassy and really forged a connection because Moffat and his colleagues in the contemporary art world in Zimbabwe are so thoughtful about using found materials to comment on the current situation in their own country, in the region, and in the world, and also so many of the artists who've gone on to significant global success from Zimbabwe are committed to developing the next generation of artists. And they're still young themselves, but they've gone on to be highlighted in shows around the world. And they're sponsoring people to come up behind them, and that's what happens at the Mbari Art Space, to cultivate those talents. Zimbabwe is a country that has enormous economic potential, but many of the people don't have access to it. And there's still great disparities in income there. So you go to the dump there's all sorts of consumer products there, computer, keyboard, and their keys, shampoo bottles, the bottle tops, old toothpaste tubes, toothbrushes, all those things that artists are, flip-flops, things that artists have used to create their art and comment on the reality around them. And the diplomacy of people-to-people connections there is really powerful. Have any of you heard of I Show Speed? Okay, so yeah. So I don't know if you picked up on this, but I Show Speed went to Africa, and one of the places he stopped was Harare, Zimbabwe, and he went to the Mbare Art Space, and Jerry Cam there was the one who coordinated his visit, but it was a way both to show the human connection of Americans visiting the continent and visiting Zimbabwe, and to highlight one of the most innovative cultural spaces in Zimbabwe and really in the region. So it was a great opportunity to forge that link and highlight those things to an audience who might not be aware of it. I'm sure you're among the more erudite I Show Speed viewers here in this room. But he has a huge audience globally, millions and millions of people. So those linkages and connections are really exciting.
Yeah, the work is by Takadiwa is really terrific. I mean, you'll approach it, and it's sort of a beautiful bead work. Maybe it's a sculpture, and then as you get close to it, you realize it is made of discarded toothpaste tubes or buttons from our excessive fast fashions, and it's this sort of juxtaposition of traditional arts and things that we might consider beautiful with the sort of perplexities and the complexities and the dilemmas of the modern age. Shifting to sort of our current politics and current administration and situation, we see that organizations like USAID, Voice of America, offices across the State Department have either been downsized or shuttered. Sometimes court cases are trying to bring them back, often with difficulty still. And a lot of us are trying to understand sort of why these decisions would be made and what the consequences are. So what do you think is some of the rationale, but also the consequences of the United States government pulling back on some of its cultural diplomacy or soft power initiatives?
Well, the stated focus of the Trump administration, their national security strategy, is very much on exerting American power and influence, and doing that through economic power and military power and the leverage of our trade relationships. Obviously, the use of tariffs has gotten a lot of attention, so I don't need to go into that. So that has been the focus and the drive of that administration, and you've seen that with the seizure of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela and the forcible transformation of the regime that he led into a vassal state of the United States. We're seeing that now with the military operations against Iran. And other things like the critical minerals initiative that the administration is pursuing, redoing trade deals around the world with the use of tariffs as leverage in negotiating deals that include greater investments in the United States. So that's the thesis, I think, behind that, with the focus on the security of the Americas as a sort of primary focus, and then going outwards from that, and downplaying security in Europe and Asia as less important for the United States and security, the resurgence of the Monroe Doctrine and things like that. My view is that hard power has a place, but you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar, and using tools that make people like you and appreciate your culture and your engagement also have a very important place in how you approach the world. And the cultural tools, things like the Voice of America and our Radio Liberty and our other broadcasting, our exchange programs, bringing foreign students to the United States to study, whether it's through independent scholarships or government scholarships, talking about the values that our country was founded on, like democracy and the rule of law. Those all have a very important place as well in building a structure that is favorable to American interests. And we want to have long-term favorable conditions. And when you use hard power to accomplish your goals, like in Guatemala, the coup against Arbenz, or in Iran, the coup against Mossadegh, those things create antibodies in societies and create resentments that, in the case of Guatemala, you have civil wars, and that was not unique. I mean, you look at Central America broadly, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, or you look at situation in Iran and the Iranian Revolution and Ayatollah Khomeini coming to power. So you have to be very thoughtful and careful as to when and how you use hard power, and not generate a resentment that maybe not in the near term an issue, but in the longer term could be a problem.
In our life, well, we had a heads up that VOA was going to close last year here at Washington. We had a heads up before it happened at Washington and Lee, because we had a student who was going to have an internship there in our spring term. And her boss called her several days before this made the headlines and said, we're not going to be here, so we don't have an internship for you. And so we sort of had an anticipation that something, a long staple of American diplomacy. If you were a nerd when you were a kid, and maybe none of you were, but I remember listening to VOA broadcasts on a short band radio when I was young. Before we turn it over to the audience, in our lifetimes, we've gone from the Cold War, which involved the Soviet Union, as we mentioned earlier, to the post-Cold War era, and this sort of window of time that seems almost distant on some days now, to 9/11 and kind of the post-9/11 world, and now to where we are today. And at each of these sort of grand moments, we've seen major shifts in U.S. posture toward the world. What are the major shifts that you see today in the world, and how should U.S. strategy be evolving? Easy question. I told you, I warned him before, and I'm no fun at parties. So
That is a great question. We're in a really fascinating moment globally. We're living through a number of really profound transformations. Obviously, from a foreign policy and global standpoint, we have the United States and China as the two preeminent powers in the world. We see Europe and the European Union as a region that de-emphasized security in favor of economic and cultural activities, which perhaps seemed like they would be able to do, but then obviously we saw Russia's unprovoked further invasion of Ukraine and Europe facing a serious security threat. You see the Russia more broadly has used military force against a number of its neighbors, not just Ukraine. And we now see in the United States the Trump administration willing to use force to change governments in other countries in a way that previous administrations have shied away from doing unilaterally without going through the UN Security Council or some other global body. So that, on the geopolitical level, is something that points us in a new territory where great powers are exerting much more direct influence over medium and smaller powers in a way that we haven't seen since prior to World War II. When you look at the economic environment globally, the rise of AI, the rise as part of the next wave of a huge change in information technology. When Brian and I were young, we didn't have the internet. It didn't exist. I know you can't imagine what that was like. It was awful. We've had to play with a stick and a hoop. It was, but that transformation to have all of the world at your fingertips all the time, to be able to communicate with anyone, anywhere, is a massive transformation. Renewable energy, a huge transformation. The ability of nations to grow based on the intellectual capacity of their citizens without the traditional kinds of natural resources like oil or minerals. That is a huge change. And I think going forward, how nations position themselves to grow economically, taking advantage of these technologies and these opportunities is going to be important, though natural resources like critical minerals that go into the components of your computers and your phones and your EVs, that's always going to be important as well. And then how do countries realign themselves? How do smaller nations and medium nations position themselves when large and powerful nations are willing to act with fewer constraints? Or will those constraints return? We're still just over a year into the Trump administration, so we don't really know how these policies will play out over the medium term. They may be very successful, they may not. We will see. But certainly how China responds to this, will they see this as an invitation to use military action to take control of Taiwan, for example? Does Russia view this as a validation of what they've done in Ukraine? African countries that are rich in critical minerals, how do they attract investment? What do they do? How do they position themselves between various powers? In Latin America and the Caribbean, they're much closer to the United States and generally are aligning themselves with whatever the U.S. policy is. Particularly now, we just saw a dozen Latin American leaders meet in Mar-a-Lago with President Trump. So clearly he's, that's not the whole hemisphere, but that's a good chunk of it. And finding those allies and locking them into relationships is something that every president wants to do in our region. When I was in the Biden administration, we had the Summit of the Americas, brought together all the leaders from our hemisphere for an event in Los Angeles in 2022. There are all sorts of really fascinating pivot points that we're seeing at this moment. That last question, again, we could go on for 2 hours just on that. So I think because we don't have time to have a conversation with all of you, maybe I should pause there.
Well, I know I have lots more questions myself, but yes, let's open this up for the people in the audience. I think we have folks with microphones, and I see a lot of my students here, but I'm promised not to choose only the ones I recognize. Do we have mics on both sides? But raise your hands, and let's go to the front row here. We'll start this way. Let's go to, I see Annabelle and Mackenzie are looking at each other. Who's he going to call on? We'll call on Annabelle.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. You touched a little bit on this briefly during Professor Alexander's question on soft power, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on your thoughts on the role of public-private partnerships in global development.
I think they're incredibly important. And when I was in Peru, we created the largest, up to that time, public-private partnership called the U.S.-Peru Cacao Alliance, cacao being the key ingredient in chocolate and a great alternative crop to things like coca, which is the key ingredient in cocaine. So you can see how the United States government would view one of those things as better than the other. But we worked with a private investment fund that was focused on impact investing to provide seed money for farmers to grow cacao, high quality cacao, and that to feed into premium, like 70%, 60% cacao products. And it helped transform the lives of the farmers who are growing it, built a supply chain for great products. And when you're in luxury supermarkets, I'm sure you're all Erewhon shoppers, you can buy some of those products and really enjoy them. So that, I think, and there are many other examples around the world, but that was one that I personally worked on, and I think was a really great opportunity to help the investors make money, to help the farmers do better, and to feed a supply chain that really needed it.
Great. Let's come over to the center here, this gentleman with his hand up in the middle.
Good evening, Ambassador.
And I'm really sorry. Introduce yourselves, since I won't be introducing everybody as I do with Annabelle. Your name and your major, just for fun.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Carter. I'm a junior majoring in politics. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what some of your expectations were before you took on the ambassadorship, and whether those expectations were met or challenged by some of the realities of the job.
Wow, great question. So let me talk about Zimbabwe. So when I was nominated to be ambassador to Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, who'd ruled Zimbabwe for decades in an increasingly authoritarian manner until he was deposed by his vice president and his defense minister, the time to go to Zimbabwe was one where they were about to have an election. There was a hope that there was going to be a significant democratic change in Zimbabwe. The former vice president, Emerson Mnangagwa, had become president of Zimbabwe. And he talked about his desire to transform the country and have a democratic country that respected the rule of law. So I got there a couple weeks before the election, presented my credentials to the acting president, who was a candidate to be elected in his own right. Mugabe was in internal exile under house arrest. And I expected that this was going to be an opportunity to consolidate a restored democracy. And Zimbabwe is a country that really held the imagination of many people over time. Formerly known as Rhodesia, in 1980 gets its majority rule after a really painful internal conflict. The unfortunate reality was right after the election, there was violence that was, protests against the outcome of the election, and it was repressed brutally. And the international community wanted to see accountability for the army shooting people in the streets in the wake of the protests. Though, for the record, I think that Emerson Mnangagwa did get the most votes in that election, so I think he was fairly elected, but I think the actions in the immediate wake of the election really harmed the country. And President Mnangagwa took steps to consolidate his power and to continue a lot of the policies that the ruling party had carried out to the detriment of the economy and the people and the rights of Zimbabwe. So that transition over a period of months and then years was a big change for me. More broadly, living in Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwean people are just, amazingly talented, smart people, and the Zimbabwean diaspora around the world, they're all incredibly successful. So you get to the idea that the reason that there has not been more progress in Zimbabwe is the operating system. It's not the hardware. And that was something that was a challenge for me to deal with and navigate. But it was a really amazing experience to serve there, a great embassy team, and I really grew to love Zimbabwean culture, the art, the literature, the energy of the Zimbabwean people, and the idea that when things are tough, you make a plan. Learning that phrase was really something that I've carried with me.
Good. Next question. Let's come over, I guess, toward the edge here. I see Charlie, but I don't want to name everybody.
Hi, my name's Charlie. I'm a senior studying politics. And my question is, so we had Ambassador Beth Jones come to university last week, and she talked a lot about trust and building it, especially in Kazakhstan. And I was wondering, was there ever a time where there wasn't trust in a relationship with your counterpart, and you kind of had to use soft power or other skills to kind of build that trust in that relationship?
Wow, see, I didn't know Beth Jones had been here. She's great, really knowledgeable, talented diplomat. And so when I went to Peru as ambassador, Ollanta Humala was the president of Peru, and he came from a leftist nationalist political movement, and he, when I met with him to present my credentials, he talked about wanting to have a positive relationship and his admiration for the United States, but also his skepticism about a lot of things in the United States and the view that the United States had exploited Peru and other countries in Latin America in the past. I spent a lot of time trying to build both a personal relationship with him and demonstrate through my actions my commitment to help the people of Peru through economic challenges, natural disasters, where we provided humanitarian assistance, educational exchanges, programs to fill the gaps that Peru had in its economy. We worked to provide export opportunities for Peru's agricultural sector, in addition to their more traditional mineral exports and natural gas and oil exports. So that was a process of building that relationship through the remainder of his presidency. And I think by the end of his term, we had forged a very strong and positive relationship, and one that built a strong base for the relationship with his successor, Pedro Pablo Kaczynski. Now, for those of you who know anything about Peruvian politics, Peru has had a string of presidents. I think since I first got to Peru, they've had 10 different presidents. So I got to Peru in 2014. So since 2014, they've had 10 presidents.
Next question. Let's come back right behind the Alex there, right there. Thank you. And I'm going to come over to this side of the room next, so you guys are on deck as well. The way the lights are hitting me.
Hi, I'm Alex. I am an economics and economics and history student. And I was wondering, so talking about soft power and this kind of cultural importance of the United States, like in spreading U.S. culture, how would you say that, the way that we define American culture and the way that we present ourselves, is like internally as well as externally, has kind of changed, and how has that really affected the international stage?
It's a great question. So I think America has always tried to leverage its contemporary culture, but also to bring new aspects to it. And I think broadening the educational exchanges and the youth exchanges focused on things like entrepreneurship is something that was relatively new and started during the Obama administration, the Young Leaders programs around the world. When I was in Peru as ambassador, we brought graffiti artists to Peru to work with Peruvian graffiti artists to show that kind of cultural exchange. And it's a medium that is really global. I think probably within graffiti, the Banksy is probably the most well-known globally, but there are many others around the world. Obviously, the United States is a country where we have innovated in music, and the introduction of jazz as a cultural tool is something that diplomats generations before me had done, but now hip-hop is a diplomatic tool for us, and obviously rock and roll is a big tool for us. So using those current tools, programs that reach all sorts of different levels. Our English as a second language programming in countries where English is not the first language is something that really reaches literally millions of people around the world. And one of the losses of not having our radio broadcasting is that was a complement to our English language teaching. And that's a way to reach out to people and tell them stories about the United States and ways that they can connect with America and build those relationships. As we go on into the future, there'll be other forms of music and art and educational exchange that will be available for people to use and to forge those relationships, and finding partners in academia, finding partners in government and in the private sector for those cultural exchanges, I think is really important to spread that message and build positive relations around the world.
I love what you're saying, because we speak a lot about being interdisciplinary as a university, and the importance of, a liberal arts education, taking classes from different majors. And it strikes me as you're saying all of this that you really can come at diplomacy and you can come at global affairs, not just through the lens of politics, or not just through sort of the study of politics, but through the study of the arts and through the humanities, and it becomes very important. Let's go over here to this young woman.
Hi, I wanted to first say thank you. My name is Heywan. I'm a global politics major and minoring in data science and poverty studies, and I'm in Professor Alexander's foreign policy class. Recently, we read a journal called Deterrence and Power, and we talked about credibility and how it depends on capacity, but also perspective from the opposition or the other country's perspective. And I wanted to ask, in a case when a democratic government has difficulty showing strong perception of intent due to, let's say, internal debates about how foreign policy should be conducted, From a foreign service perspective, what is it like from inside the country you are representing basically abruptly stops the international commitments that it has made? And what are the things you maintain if the credibility of the country you are representing or the policy is in question?
That's a great question. So, well, one, there's government-to-government messaging. So, diplomats, not just the ambassador, but at all levels, from entry-level, mid-level, they have contacts with people in government, and you need to make sure that everybody inside your embassy is on the same page and delivering the message of what your government's intent is. You also need to make sure that you are on the same page with Washington, because if somebody in the State Department or the Pentagon or some other, or the White House, national security staff is delivering a different message, the country you're in has diplomats in the United States, and they're hearing messages. And as you allude to, they're hearing messages both in the public sphere but also privately. So you need to make sure that you're communicating that clear intent. Lateral movement is also important. So communicating with other diplomats in the country that you are posted to, making sure that they're echoing that message, and they may agree with your message or disagree with your message, but you want them to say, when they interact with the government, hey, I was talking to the Americans, and they are really hard over on X, Y, or Z, and you guys need to listen, or their Americans are crazy, but what are you going to do about it? Whatever that other third country diplomat is saying, at least they're stating your message. Then there's the public diplomacy piece. How are you using the media in the country? Typically, U.S. diplomats have strong access to the media, unless it's a very repressive country. So, newspapers, radio, television, YouTube, podcasts, whatever. Make sure that you are getting that message out laterally if it's a message that is acceptable for public consumption. There may be some messages that you don't want to have exposed to the public. And then when people are doubting that message because maybe there's a strong opposition view coming from the Congress or from the public in the United States, part of your message is, the president of our country's position is X, and you need to understand that. And the president is going to use all of the tools available, from the bully pulpit to executive orders to putting forward legislation to deploying the military or providing trade incentives or whatever those tools are. The president will be using those tools to accomplish this foreign policy goal. That said, and I'll conclude with this, is you also have to understand what is the limit of what our own government is willing to do. Because we may say, we are unhappy about X, or we want you to do Y, but if we're not willing to use all of the tools in our toolkit to accomplish those goals, you need to know that so you're modulating your message. Because every time you draw a red line, and famously, I think President Obama's red line in Syria about the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons is cited. When you publicly draw a red line and the other guy crosses it, and then you don't do anything, that is a big hit to your credibility, and it makes others more willing to cross those red lines.
We'll continue to make our microphone holders jump around the room. This young man here in the front row.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, Professor Alexander. My name is Akash. I'm a sophomore studying economics and politics. My question is, how should the U.S. respond to the growth of an organization like BRICS, which is clearly trying to court countries in the global south based on challenging the U.S.-led world order? How should we respond to their development?
So I think the policy approach needs to be geared toward the member states of BRICS. So how you deal with Brazil is going to be different from how you deal with Russia, how different from China or South Africa or India or some of their associated groupings. And I think when you are dealing with a multilateral grouping that you feel is detrimental to your interest, you want to deal with each of the countries one-on-one and not grant them a larger venue. Giving a message to Brazil that, hey, we are a major trading partner for you. 2/3 of the Brazilian economy is made up of companies from the United States. Your top technology sector companies are American companies operating in Sao Paulo and Recife. And your soybean exports to the United States are important. Delivering that message. The message to China might be a very different message, like we're going to have a challenging relationship if you don't do X, Y, or Z. But having that narrow relationship, not granting them group venue, talking to third country states who are being lured toward BRICS and saying to them, we are going to make you a better deal than what you would get if you are associating with these countries. And I state these approaches because I view BRICS as a way for middle and rising powers seeking to counter the influence and power of the United States. And it's in that configuration, it is very challenging to make a positive offer to BRICS when their goal is to counter the United States as a collective. I think that the role of BRICS, when you see leadership changes, perhaps in Brazil, Bolsonaro didn't really care about BRICS, Lula cares about BRICS. I think if you see change in India or in South Africa, maybe they will value BRICS a lot less. And I think, if you think about the situation in South Africa now, they're trying to figure out how they navigate a very difficult relationship with the United States and how they adjust themselves and look for ways to forge a relationship, but also preserve their own values and their own goals.
We have about 5 minutes left, so we'll try to get a student question in, and then I'm going to use the MCs.
Yeah, there's a question right there. I want your question.
Okay, all right, there we go.
I know you had your hand up for a while.
Hi, my name is Katya. I'm a sophomore double majoring in theater and politics. My question was, as a proponent of soft power, have you seen the politics of art being used to kind of heal diplomatic relationships that otherwise have been severed because of the use of hard power or coercive tactics?
So I think that soft power broadly takes longer to have an impact. Hard power, you can drop a bomb or a missile on someone, and that's going to have an immediate impact, not only on their lives, but how they view you. Rebuilding trust after something like that takes a lot longer. And the ways that you can do that, I would say starting out with people-to-people engagement, things like humanitarian assistance, educational exchanges, in terms of culture, and you mentioned art, so many different art forms, but when you're in the education space, that's a great space where you can also introduce the arts writ large, so literature, film, theater, the use of theater as a form of social reconciliation. So in countries that have gone through conflict, or are facing challenges, using theater as a tool. In Zimbabwe, there was an ethnic conflict between the Shona and the Ndebele peoples, and a genocide called the Gukurundi, and using theater to restore relationships between communities where they can have a safe space to talk about the issues that provoke conflict. It can be sensitive in our own domestic politics, but using theater as a way to, or art, paintings, drawings, literature as a way to talk about the HIV/AIDS pandemic in Southern Africa was a way to reach out to people and engage them. One of the most sad ways, well, there's so many sad ways, but people contract HIV, but among the sad ways, mother-to-child transmission in utero, and meeting a generation of children who were born HIV positive. Through our PEPFAR programming, we're able to provide them antiretroviral therapies that suppress the virus to undetectable levels and will allow them to live a full life. But to know that you're HIV positive from childhood, giving them coping strategies for that. So the education in that process, storytelling, art, bringing them up, that was something that we did in Zimbabwe when I was there. The building that soft power over time, the relationships, academics from around the world who come to the United States, get their advanced degrees here. Many of them choose to remain. Many of them go back to their home countries. But they have formed a bridge that provides a cultural and educational bridge between our societies so that when there are tough moments in a relationship, there's that cultural link, that bond that keeps our societies in a better place than it would be if only you had governments dealing with each other with frictions. So those are some of the ways that you could do that. Again, I'll just come back to it takes a lot longer to build a soft power relationship. And it's something that ideally you're doing over generations so that you're bringing people from youth to positions of influence in the societies that they're from.
Ambassador Nichols, we're just about at time, but my goal, one of the things I hope students walk away as they enter the world is a sense of hope. Yet if we look at the sort of the rush of events these days, there's a lot to be fearful or to feel is just bad news. But so that we can end on a positive note, tell us something that you think that is good that's going on in the world, and something that the students could enter that world as future leaders and ambassadors and diplomats and business people and artists. What can they be hopeful about?
Well, hearing the questions from this audience and being on campus, clearly you bring great intelligence and thoughtfulness into the world. Today's world is one where the interconnectedness and the ability to engage at a people-to-people level has never been greater. You can listen to people from around the world in podcasts and TikToks and Instagrams and YouTube videos. You can reach out to people through networking. All of you who are thinking about careers in anything, I hope you've already started your LinkedIn page and are building your networks. Brian's comments about the importance of a broad liberal arts education is so true. One of the wonderful things about being a diplomat is you get to engage in all sorts of different spaces. And, you know, one day I'd be talking about drip agriculture on arid spaces. Another moment I'm talking about Nietzsche and German philosophy. And another moment I'm talking about, great American artists from, the 1800s to the present. Bringing all the things that you're learning here to bear in a world that is super connected is important. And the technologies that we need to have a better world are growing at a huge, huge speed and rate. The renewable energy sources are complementing the traditional energy sources. Our ability to do things that we've never done before grows daily. Those of you who are writing your papers with AI, you can use AI for research, but don't let it write your paper, because when you're in the elevator with your boss, you need to be able to explain the issue in a coherent and powerful way in 3 minutes. And so use that education that you're getting here, and make sure that it's up here and can't be taken away from you when your phone is ripped out of your hand or runs out of battery in the middle of the back of Beyond. Listen, I spent 35 years as a foreign policy practitioner, and I continue to engage both teaching and on the boards of 2 nonprofit organizations, and on the board of a copper mining company that has global operations and tens of thousands of employees. But the reason that I do all these things is it is so powerful to feel part of the international community and to be engaged, and whether I'm in Canada or Zambia or Peru or Panama or wherever, or China or Indonesia, there are people out there who want to know what you think, and you're arriving where they are with amazing tools that you've learned here, and I wish you all the success in the world. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Terrific. Ambassador Nichols, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming to Washington and lead. And thank you again to our audience and to our organizers, to W&L Museums, and for everybody who made this event possible. But thank you again, Ambassador. Now you don't have to worry about me calling on you for questions anymore.